July 7, 1943. The sun bled over the Kursk salient, that vast, scorched arena where the fate of the Eastern Front was about to be decided. Dawn rolled like smoke across wheat fields shattered by weeks of artillery. The air trembled with the dull, endless growl of engines. Panzer columns crawling toward the Soviet lines, black crosses gleaming in the morning haze. In the distance, dust clouds marked the advance of the Wehrmacht spearheads. Tigers, panthers, stugs. Steel beasts moving with the confidence of conquest. For 2 years, the Germans had cut through the east like a blade through cloth. And this morning, they laughed again. They laughed at the rumours, whispers that the Red Army had sent armoured planes into the sky. Flying tanks. They mocked, lighting cigarettes beside their half-tracks. What's next? Flying tractors. But high above the haze, beyond the reach of their disbelief, the flying tank was already coming. At 2,000 metres in the cold blue of the upper air, a formation of Ilyushin Il-2 Shturmovix carved silent shadows across the sky. Their canopies were fogged with frost. Their pilots wore thick leather gloves, goggles iced at the edges. Below them stretched the endless steppe, a chessboard of smoke, trenches, and the crawling black dots of German armour. The lead pilot, call sign Krasny 12, steadied his gloved hand over the throttle. The CKS machine guns on the nose glinted faintly in the dawn. Under his wings, the rockets, RS-82s, white, tipped and deadly, waited like coiled fists. He spoke once into the radio, voice flat, emotionless. Ground targets. Column on the road to Oral. Begin attack run. And then the Shturmovix dropped from the clouds. The first sound was not the scream of engines. It was the howl of air tearing past armoured skin. The Il-2 didn't dance like a fighter. It dove like a hammer. The pilots felt the vibration build through their bones as the altimeter spun. German drivers looked up, shielding their eyes. The black silhouettes of the Il-2s grew larger, wings thick, fuselage broad, the armoured nose gleaming with sunlight. Then the thunder began. The VY-23 cannons opened fire, twin bursts of 23 Myomek rounds tearing through the morning like ripping metal. The first shells smashed into the lead panzer, turning its turret into a fireball. Seconds later, the RS-82 rocket streaked downward, smoke tails carving white scars across the sky. Impact. The road vanished in dust. Flames leapt higher than the trees. German infantry dove for cover, shouting over the roar of engines, the shock of explosions. A truck carrying ammunition vanished in a blinding orange flash. What kind of plane can take a hit like that? One soldier wrote later in his diary, "We fired at it with everything. Rifles, MG-42s, even flak, but it just kept coming. The Il-2s didn't break away. They levelled out at 30 metres, engines snarling like beasts. Machine guns stitched across the line of vehicles. Each burst sent bodies and metal scattering into the wheat. The smell of burning oil and gunpowder filled the valley." One Stuka observer, circling miles above, later recalled seeing the Soviet formation slice through the convoy like a scythe through dry grass. They did not turn. They did not climb. They simply erased what was there. By the time the Il-2s pulled up, the road to Oral was nothing but black smoke and craters. As they disappeared into the haze, the laughter that had greeted their name, flying tanks, had turned into silence. Below, among the wreckage of twisted armour and charred trucks, a single German officer knelt in the dust, staring at the sky where the armoured shapes had vanished. He had seen what the Red Army had built, not a fragile machine of desperation, but a weapon born from steel, rage, and survival. In that moment, the myth of German invincibility cracked, and over the burning steppe of Kursk, the flying tank earned its name. By 1941, the German war machine was a thunder rolling eastward. From the fields of Poland to the suburbs of Moscow, its armoured spearheads had crushed everything before them. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg doctrine, speed, surprise, and mechanised precision had rewritten the very meaning of warfare. Their tanks struck like lightning. Their aircraft, Messerschmitts, Stukas, Heinkels, ruled the sky. To most of Europe, the Luftwaffe seemed untouchable. In those early years, the Soviet Air Force, the VVS, was broken, disorganized, and reeling. Thousands of aircraft were destroyed on the ground in the first weeks of Operation Barbarossa. Entire squadrons were wiped out before they could even take off. The Red Air Force bled. But it did not die. At the Ilyushin Design Bureau in Moscow, a small team of engineers worked through nights lit only by the glow of kerosene lamps. Their task was desperate, almost absurd. Build an aircraft that could survive in the teeth of enemy fire. One that could fly low, hit hard, and come home even after being torn apart. Sergei Ilyushin, the aircraft's chief designer, wrote in his notes, "One need a plane not for air superiority, but for revenge." The result was the Ilyushin Il-2 Shturmovik, a machine unlike any before it. When German intelligence first heard of a heavily armoured Soviet ground attack aircraft, they dismissed it outright. The idea sounded ridiculous. An attack plane so slow and heavy that it could barely climb. Flying tank, they sneered. A nickname meant as mockery, not respect. But in Moscow, the term stuck, with pride. By 1942, the Eastern Front had transformed into a war of attrition. Every mile of ground was soaked in blood. The Red Army had learned a bitter truth. To stop the German armour, you had to break its supply lines, its columns, its very rhythm of movement. That's where the Il-2 came in. Built like a tank, armoured like one, and almost as hard to kill, it was designed to fly low and slow, directly into the chaos of battle. It carried 23 mm or 37 mm cannons, rockets, anti-tank bombs, and later, even rear gunners for defence. Its mission was brutally simple: destroy everything that moved on the ground. German panzer commanders soon began to notice the difference. The first Il-2 units appeared in the skies over Smolensk and Stalingrad. Single-seat variants diving low, their engines screaming, armoured skin shrugging off small arms fire. They didn't look elegant. They didn't move gracefully. But wherever they appeared, German convoys stopped moving. In the early days, Luftwaffe pilots mocked them over the radio. "Cement airplanes!" The Russians send their tractors to fly. But mockery fades quickly under the weight of fear. By mid-1943, the tide was shifting. At Kursk, where over 6,000 tanks clashed in the largest armoured battle in history, the Il-2 became more than an aircraft. It became a presence. For the Soviet infantry pinned under panzer fire, the scream of Il-2 engines was salvation. For the Germans, it became something else entirely. "When you heard that roar," wrote a German grenadier from the 4th Panzer Division, "you knew death was coming. You dropped your rifle and prayed it wasn't for you." And each side now understood the stakes. The Luftwaffe still ruled the high altitudes, but below 1,000 meters, in the hellish world of tracers and explosions, the Red Air Force was learning to dominate. And in that low, brutal theatre, the flying tank was unmatched. The stage was set, not just for a battle of steel, but for a transformation of belief. Because when the first waves of Il-2s appeared in formation, their engines echoing over the steppe, the German laughter of 1941 was already dying in their throats. They would soon learn that mockery, on the Eastern Front, could be fatal. The Il-2 was not born beautiful. It was born brutal. Every line, every bolt, every weld of its fuselage was an answer to necessity. To survive, to strike, to return. Where Western aircraft prized speed and elegance, the Il-2 was an instrument of endurance. It wasn't designed to dance. It was designed to endure punishment and deliver it back tenfold. At its heart roared the Mechalin AM-38 engine, a 12-cylinder liquid-cooled beast, generating nearly 700 horsepower at takeoff. It drank fuel like fire itself, propelling the 14,000-pound aircraft barely above 400 kilometers per hour, slower than any German fighter in the sky. But speed was never its armor. Armor was its speed. The Il-2's most radical feature was its armored shell, a literal bathtub of 5 to 12 millimeters of hardened steel surrounding the cockpit, engine, and fuel tanks. This wasn't plating added to a plane. It was the plane. The entire forward fuselage was made of armor plate, the skin itself load-bearing. Machine gun rounds bounced off it like hail. Soviet pilots called it the Zashchitnik, the protector. Ground troops simply called it the hunchback. In the chaos of battle, it became a moving fortress. When anti-aircraft fire erupted, other aircraft scattered. The Il-2 lowered its nose and dove straight through, trusting its armor, trusting its purpose. Behind its heavy wings hung an arsenal tailored for annihilation. 2 VY-23 NUMU cannons, firing shells that could punch through 15 numium of armor. 2 7.62 Munch KS machine guns for soft targets, up to 600 kilograms of bombs under the wings. 8 RS-82 or RS-132 rockets, the unguided thunderbolts that made German tank crews' hearts seize. Each Il-2 carried enough firepower to erase a small column. In the Soviet doctrine of Shturmovik strikes, they didn't act alone. They attacked in pairs or fours, flying low, under 100 meters, weaving between trees, smoke, and anti-aircraft bursts. The doctrine was merciless. Attack once. If you survive, attack again. For many, that meant death within weeks. But for those who mastered it, like Anna Yegorova, Nina Raspopova, and Stepan Novikov, the Il-2 was not a coffin, it was a companion. A machine that could take hits, lose half a wing, and still drag its pilot home. In German combat reports, disbelief turned to frustration. Why hit them again and again, but they don't fall. It's as if the Russians build planes from tanks. Oberleutnant Karlfo, 9th Panzer Division, 1942, the Il-2's sound became infamous. A low, grinding howl that rose in pitch as it dove. Soldiers on the ground called it the Black Death's trumpet. The noise alone sent infantry scattering from their positions. And while its slowness was once mocked, it soon became part of its lethality. Flying low, steady, and armoured, it could line up its attacks with surgical precision, every burst of cannon fire walking perfectly across a convoy. Yet, even the mightiest machine carries human fragility within it. Early Il-2s lacked a rear gunner, a flaw that made them easy prey for German fighters. Luftwaffe pilots called them sitting ducks, and in 1941-42, hundreds were lost that way, but the Soviets adapted quickly. By 1943, the Il-2M introduced a rear gunner position protected by armor, mounting a UBT 12.7 Munich machine gun. The Hunter had grown eyes in the back of its head. The transformation was complete. The flying tank was no longer just an aircraft. It was a doctrine, a symbol of resilience, a weapon forged by necessity and hardened by loss. A pilot once said, "If the Il-2 could feel pain, it would never show it. It would only answer in fire." By the summer of 1943, its rumbling presence filled the skies from Kursk to the Dnieper. German convoys began to travel at night. Troops hid vehicles under trees. Tank crews watched the sky not for fighters, but for the slow, armoured silhouettes they could not outrun. Because in daylight, under the roar of engines and the glint of steel wings, every man on the ground knew. When the flying tank appeared, something was about to die. July 8, 1943. Kursk, Central Front. The morning heat shimmered off the endless Russian plains. Overhead, black columns of smoke twisted like dark towers, the signature of a battle that had already swallowed hundreds of tanks. On a dirt road near the village of Malorkangelsk, a German armoured convoy was moving east. Panzerstugs, fuel trucks, field kitchens, an entire column stretching for miles. Dust hung in the air like fog. The men rode easy, joking, helmets off, shirts open in the summer air. They were veterans, soldiers of the 4th Panzer Army. They had seen Russian aircraft before, the clumsy I-16s, the fragile P-2S, planes that fell apart after a few bursts from an MG-42. So when they first saw the distant dots on the horizon, they didn't flinch. Probably yaks. One driver muttered, "Nothing to worry about." But then came the sound, a deep, grinding roar, unlike any they'd heard before. It wasn't the scream of a dive bomber. It was a growl, a heavy metallic thunder that rolled across the valley like a storm trapped inside an engine. The dots grew larger, wide wings, thick fuselages, black Soviet stars painted on armoured hides. 8 of them, flying low, no formation tricks, no barrel rolls, just a straight, implacable line. Il-2 Shturmovix. The German commander shouted for flak positions, but it was too late. The Il-2s had already dropped. At 100 meters altitude, the first wave opened fire. Twin V-wire, 23 cannons stitched the road with molten metal. The lead truck exploded, flipping sideways, its cargo, ammunition, detonating in a chain of violent flashes. Flames rolled outward, swallowing the column. The air was filled with a sound like tearing earth. Rockets streaking downward, shrieking through the air before slamming into armour. They came straight for us, remembered Jeffretta Hans Weller in his post-war memoir. Not like bombers. Not like fighters. Just straight. As if they wanted to ram us. A Panzer IV tried to pivot its turret upward. Too slow. A rocket hit its engine deck. The explosion tore off the rear armour, throwing the crew out in flames. The Il-2s made a single pass, then pulled up through smoke and tracer fire, some trailing holes the size of fists through their wings, but not breaking formation. The German gunners below fired frantically, emptying belts into the sky. The tracers sparked off armour and vanished. Then the second wave came. These carried PTA 2.5 anti-tank bomblets, small, shaped charges designed to pierce even the thick armour of Tigers. The Shturmovix released them in clouds. Hundreds of glittering metal seeds falling like deadly rain. When they struck, they turned the convoy into chaos. Tanks brewed up one by one, black smoke and orange flame consuming the road. Half-tracks tried to flee, only to crash into burning wrecks. Within minutes, the battlefield was transformed. A moving army turned into a corridor of fire. One Luftwaffe spotter, watching from a nearby ridge, radioed a single stunned report. The ground is burning. When the Shturmovix finally climbed away, their exhausts trailing black scars against the horizon, the road to Oral was gone, replaced by wreckage, silence, and the low crackle of burning steel. The Germans had thrown everything at them: flak guns, machine guns, even rifle volleys. It made no difference. The Il-2s had flown through it all, slow, methodical, unflinching. Out of the 8 aircraft that attacked, 6 returned. 2 were lost. Their wrecks would later be found miles away. Engines buried in the soil, guns empty, wings riddled with holes. But every rocket fired, every bomb gone. That was the day the laughter stopped. After Kursk, German infantry began whispering a new name: Schwarzer Tod. The Black Death. The nickname spread through the ranks, not from propaganda, but from fear. You don't hear them until it's too late, wrote an officer of the Grossdeutschland division. And when you do, you pray, because you know the next second the world ends. In that single week, more than Vun's 200 Il-2 sorties were flown over Kursk. The Luftwaffe could not stop them. Anti-aircraft guns could not drive them off. They came every day, every hour, turning German supply routes into graveyards. The flying tank, once a subject of ridicule, had become the most feared shape in the eastern sky. On that scorched July morning, as smoke rolled across the steppe and wreckage smouldered in the fields, one truth burned brighter than any flame arrogance had met armour. And armour had won.